So this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about customer engagement, the value of customer engagement. So first off, we got a panel. I suppose really this session here is all around communication, and so in this session here we're going to talk a little bit about contacting and communicating customers, because that's really a lot of what collections is really about. Why is it valuable? Where do we add value? And how can you use that to really drive better customer engagement or greater customer engagement to get better or good outcomes? So joining me today, we've got, hopefully we've got Michael Allison, who's Commercial Director from Roma Finance. Chris Fitch, who I don't think is going to join us today. I think he had something else going on. Unfortunately, had a conflict and couldn't make it today. We've got Jonathan Shaw, Partnerships Manager from Reach Out, Sigma Connected Group, and Andy Turner, who's a Senior Business Development Manager from Webio. So I don't know if you want to join me on stage real quick. Yeah, unfortunately, Chris can't join us. It was unavoidable, unfortunately. Now I know you can't read this, but I wanted to put there just up in terms of some of the things we're seeing. I think one of the things we've seen around communication was the importance, and we were just chatting actually earlier around the importance of telephony. And so some of the things we saw, certainly I kind of seen in conversations, the importance of telephony as well as digital. So it's sort of like this mixed kind of picture in terms of communication and how to get hold of people. So I know we talk a lot about digital, but we're going to talk a bit about telephony a little bit as well. And so my first question there was really, I suppose, with all the inflation and stress for consumers in the background, do we need to start thinking about the dynamics of customer engagement maybe a little bit differently? Especially with some of the things we talked about this morning. I mean, Michael, do you want to maybe kick off with that question?
Sure.
I mean, are you seeing changes? Are you seeing changes, or?
What we are, I think, the first change is that a lot of people want to talk to us a lot earlier. I think when it comes to communication, anybody who was around in 2008 and 2009 through the financial crisis knows what it felt like in those years afterwards about repairing their own credit or being able to have access to finance again in the future. So people who have seen that previously and lived through that, and these are probably people who are probably, unfortunately, more my age, the wrong side of 40, they will contact us a lot quicker and they'll want to speak to somebody as well. So preemptive strategies from us is key to be able to speak to borrowers. But what we're seeing is a lot more people who are much more credit savvy these days. They understand their own credit profile. So they're trying to get ahead of the curve. But to get ahead of the curve, it's not about using digital. It's pushing the conversations into ourselves.
Yeah. So people are, so with people getting into financial stress, let's say, so they'll say they're going to come to you much more proactively than they did historically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a question: are they in distress or stress?
Yeah.
But they want to have that conversation and that option across their credit profile, and making sure that they're able to keep ahead of that curve and come to quality conversations.
Yeah. And Jonathan, what's your kind of view on that in terms of stuff you've seen at Reach Out?
Yeah, so Reach Out, we're an early engagement triage service. So we're working across financial services, energy, water, to kind of help them reach customers that are disengaged, so who aren't responding to their letters or emails or calls. And so those accounts are sent to us for a short 2-week period where we'll engage with those customers. And we're not there to take any payment. We're there to see what support they need and what support they can get from their original creditor, the person that's asked us to call them. And what we've seen with this is that the shared narrative of the cost of living crisis and the pandemic before it, this is all something that we've experienced. And the approach that we've seen, I think, in some of the letters from the people that we work with and the way that we communicate as well is changing the narrative for the customer away from this is your debt and in isolation for that person. Because one of the huge barriers that I know MAP's kind of reported on or going to report on is, the barriers to people engaging with debt advice. And one of them is that shame and guilt and embarrassment and that idea of this debt is mine and I'm the only person who has got myself in this situation, and it's very isolating, and obviously we all know the sort of impact it has on people's mental health. So this whole changing the narrative away is to, this is something we've all been through, and we know that millions of people are struggling with the cost of living crisis, and we want to be able to support you in that. That has been the way that we've engaged with customers, is that we want to break people out of that isolation and know that actually there's nothing to be embarrassed about the situation that you're in. You're not alone in it, and there is support available for you.
And what's your reaction to the conversation this morning around, is the media driving a different conversation than it was historically, and is that a good thing or not? You part of that? Is the media, so the fact there's a lot of noise around, or a lot of noise is the wise word, there's a lot of publicity around cost of living and people are struggling, is that driving greater volume? And is that a good thing, or is that a good thing or not? Because you're actually identifying more people, even though it's costing you more.
Well, I suppose for us, we're proactively engaging with people that haven't engaged up to that point. So that I should just preface it with that. I think with the media, there is still a temptation to go for headline grabbing issues. So especially within enforcement, that's always an issue. It doesn't matter sometimes all the great stuff that enforcement agencies can do. There's still an issue with this man knocked on my door and that is a headline grabber. I think the same issue for housing as well. There's always going to be damp and mold issues, and that is going to be the headline grabbing issue here. So I don't always think that that's a good way to gauge sort of the peaks, I think, in demand, because actually they're going for clickbait essentially, aren't they? And I think so the demand that we're seeing is, I mean, some of our energy clients are sending us thousands and thousands of accounts each month. So perhaps actually there's more of a desire from those companies to actually be sending more customers to us because they want to try something a bit different.
Yeah, it's just interesting to base out, to almost like look underneath what you're hearing to see what's actually kind of going on to a certain extent. And I suppose, Andy, I mean, you're more in the kind of like the digital space, but I mean, what are some of the dynamics that you've kind of seen? I mean, we can talk a little bit about, migration to digital as well.
Yeah, sure. On that topic with the phone, so we did a survey recently, commissioned a survey, and for more complex credit-related tasks, which would sort of include vulnerability and things like that. Yeah, the phone was the majority preference channel to talk about it. Second to that was WhatsApp, business, and also followed by SMS, and then some of the other channels below that. What was interesting in this part of the survey for simple credit related tasks, the phone was still the majority preference on the survey, but not quite as big a majority. So, that just sort of lends itself well to, when it is more of a complex negotiation, maybe on a payment or someone's in sort of distress, definitely digital channels can be really good to re-engage them, to still show that empathy and support in the sort of way you've designed the conversation in the sort of chatbot builder, using sort of empathetic tone and reassuring people and really giving them that sort of control back of the conversation, which they're kind of avoiding or trying to disappear from, to give them that reassurance and almost that comfort blanket to have to pick up the phone or to message back and then maybe pick up the phone. So that's what I'd probably say about the digital side complementing the phone activities when it comes to the more people in need or sort of complex ones. As for the more simple ones, I mean, that's a whole sort of other area which is great for cost saving or driving additional capability in your contact center, which we can maybe get into later.
So did I hear that right? You're saying, but for simple transaction, the phone was preferred? That's what you said?
Yeah, so on this survey, which was 2,000 people, so not millions, the phone was still preferred, but just not quite as much.
So it's interesting, that sort of counter narrative around simple transactions, we tend to push towards digital, but you're actually saying what the customers are saying was like, I'd rather do that using the human, and yet digital, where I got something more complex, I'm probably better off going digital. I'd prefer to go digital because I can answer the questions almost like anonymously. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I'd say it's the other way around. So with the phone and when it's more complex sort of tasks or conversations, there is a higher majority preferring the phone because, again, that human emotional impact on a conversation, you can't really beat it. But whereas more simple tasks, less people were leaning towards the phone, albeit still the majority.
Okay. So is that around? I mean, Michael, what's your kind of reaction to that? I mean, you sort of see that in terms of, because I thought that was sort of counter narrative there, but it sounds like it's more familiar to what we kind of see, which is automation of like simple tasks versus the more complex ones, you sort of use digital to get through that to then have a telephone conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the human touch being the intelligent touch. And if you can, if it's about self-servicing or doing a simple task, it's not just about what we do in our credit profile or in our credit life. We do a lot of things digitally where we're able to maneuver our life around. But there is a time when authenticity is needed.
Yeah.
And that's when actually speaking to that human is key, and having that complex discussion. If you do it digitally, you only get the result that you went there for. If you do it through conversation with an experienced professional, you may get things that you didn't realise that you needed or support that you required.
Yeah. So how do we get to this almost like blended human digital kind of approach? I mean, what's the best way to do it? Because it did seem like starting the conversation digitally is a good way to, but then you need the human, and so it feels like it's that blended kind of conversation. I mean, what's the best way of sort of thinking about that, or how do you think about that?
First thing, don't make it difficult to speak to somebody.
Yeah.
Don't make it a hard thing to find how I can speak to an individual. Don't hide a telephone number. Don't have 15 options. The first option should be, we've got a borrower, we've got a customer, we've got somebody who wants to speak to somebody. Let's make that the priority task there and then everything else can follow. But what we've done over time is we overthink it, and so actually if they press option 1, they can do X. Press option 2, they can do Y. And option 6 is the human touch that they're actually craving, and they're having to listen to all the options. So it's quite simple, really. And we're in a world where we're digitally advanced. As Andy said, when people need help, when people want to have a complex conversation, they want to speak to an experienced professional.
Yeah, so, but putting that on the reverse kind of question, which is, if they don't want to speak to a human, will they select not speaking to a human? I mean, I suppose that's kind of the fear, which is why people say, well, I'm going to put digital up front because I want to drive people to digital. Drive to digital was one of the questions that was kind of made. You're saying, don't do that. You've got to have an option because people will select digital if they want to.
What I'm saying is, at this moment in time, the world is telling us that people want to speak to people because they are feeling either stress or distress through finances. So don't hide that option away with digital and trying to keep up with the Joneses about the latest technology. However, for those who don't want to speak to a human, that's absolutely fine. Make sure that they can still do it. Well, maybe that could be option 2 instead of option 1.
Yeah. Jonathan, what's your kind of view?
It's really interesting. I think for us, it's making sure the quality is there in both channels, because you don't want to have this, I tried down one route and then I'm forced to use the other. It's got to come down to the preference of the customer and making sure that the quality is there for both, because otherwise it's just, I suppose the priority is the customer experience with that, isn't it? It's like, how quickly can I get this thing resolved that I want to sort today? And just making sure that we're not then spreading ourselves too thin in having, I don't know, some TikTok option, or, it's great to have like WhatsApp for business. I think that's a great shout. But, when we kind of spread ourselves too thin in terms of having all these different engagement channels, then the quality suffers. And I think that only leads to dissatisfaction.
So this morning we talked a lot about the economy, potential arrears increases, those kind of things. I mean, what's the solution for potentially capacity issues, particularly if you've got human contact, and that can create capacity issues if you have increasing volumes. I mean, Andy, is digital the only solution for that? I mean, that's the. I imagine you're going to be an advocate of it, but.
Well, so we run a lot of pilots and a lot of clients running in BAU, and what I mean by that is, it's really companies who are, if we talk about outbound collections, they might be getting single-digit response rates on a file going outbound. They're looking to maybe cut costs, or they're maybe launching a new product and they need to redeploy some staff to a different part of the business. And they're like, okay, cool. So how can we, number one, engage more people and increase our contact rates, but also how can we do it cost efficiently? And so this is really where digital comes in, but blended with, again, the right conversational design. And this is really about the experts of, say, a Webio or whoever you work with, combined with your expertise. You guys know your processes, you know the sort of demographic and then the sort of type of customers you're dealing with. We know all of the nuances that work in terms of the right open-ended questions. We know how to blend the right AI intents in the bots. And all this means is that you're going to give your customers as many opportunities to sort of engage with you in a way that sort of suits them. So an example would be, there was one file that one of our clients, a big water company, had basically taken back from 3 different DCAs who had worked it, call it a dead file, and they thought, look, hey, let's use this file as part of the pilot. Let's see what you can do. And really, up until that point, there had been quite a lot of do this, do that, call this number, click this link, communication with the portfolio. And so we helped them really design more of a much more supportive type messaging, where they could engage back and forward. And they got a 9% response rate on the file. Now, again, that's still single digit, but considering it was a dead file, that was really cool. And that was really just changing some wording and how really the sort of conversational strategy in the channel that they're using. So I would say it's just all about complementing what you guys are already doing on the phone, on an email as well, with these other channels that are available. Like we talk about WhatsApp Business, two-way SMS, done in the right way where people aren't going to think it's spam SMS, because there's some little tricks you can use. Tricks is the wrong word, some techniques. And with the WhatsApp Business, using the right first message templates and managing it in a way where your messages aren't going to be flagged at the sort of more of a negative status by WhatsApp, is something that your supplier or a Webio can help with, and the results will sort of speak for themselves.
And I suppose, but also part of that is you talk about like customization or nuancing the solutions. I mean, how do we sort of like think about making sure it's nuanced for particular segments? I mean, is that kind of, Michael, what's your kind of approach on that in terms of like if you're using digital communications to make some of those initial contacts?
There's a big thing when you're on board a customer called know your customer. And that actually needs to be the theme that runs all the way through. So understanding your customer base and your customer demographic or the persona of them, you can actually, there's the old opt-in, opt-out process, capturing how people want to be communicated with day one is key. But what's interesting, and just listening to what Andy said, I was thinking back to when I started out in collections, which was a long time ago. All that happened is people just didn't open the letters and didn't answer the phone. So actually digitization gives us the opportunity to present data in a softer wording in front of somebody, more engaging and enticing contact. So when it comes to customization, I think what we need is a toolkit. And you start with the preferred method of contact for a borrower, but then we work our way through a toolkit to try and build those responses.
So almost like A/B testing, where you sort of say, well, this works for this one, or this works for that one, and sort of like almost like cascading down in terms of finding something that works for that particular segment.
Absolutely. It's also making sure that we don't over-profile people, because if the last couple of years has taught us anything, a lot can change very quickly. But it's making sure that we have a toolkit and we don't just send the same letter every Monday for weeks on end, which was what collections used to be, and then ring them morning, noon and night. We've evolved a lot since then, and it's using those new tools and making sure that we are using variety, we're using the right touch, pitch and tone, and we still have the option to speak to them as well.
Yeah. So ChatGPT stole a lot of headlines this year, although we didn't talk about it last year. And I suppose it's good just to find out. So that's one way, or using large language models is one way of getting that extra degree of customization or changing things up in terms of different communication styles. I mean, what's the kind of the view of the panel around how that could be integrated or not, or those kind of models? I mean, Jonathan, what's your kind of view on it?
I think I'd probably echo what Vanessa said earlier. I think it's got to be that support type function for agents to spot patterns that otherwise might have taken the agent 10 or 15 minutes of multitasking, of looking at this file over here and managing the conversation at the same time, when in fact actually if you could use AI to some extent to be able to spot those patterns and give you almost like a bit of a head start in that conversation, then that would be brilliant. I think I would have concerns about if you were to use AI on such a scale that it's like hyper automation. I've played around with it and sometimes it lies. So you've always got to have that human oversight of it to actually make sure it's not spitting out the wrong results or just getting things wrong completely. So I think it's not going to be this magic silver bullet. I think it's just got to be used appropriately, I'd say.
I mean, Andy, I know you've done some stuff on with some of the modelling stuff as well. What's your kind of view on it in terms of like use cases where it could be used in communication?
Yeah, sure. So you're absolutely right. ChatGPT can give a very convincing response, but the question is the response compliant? Is it the right thing to say within this financial context? So definitely the underlying technology, and I'm not like an AI sort of expert myself, but the underlying technology is using a transformer model, which is a deep learning model. So basically our AI team essentially looked at that and thought, right, how can we leverage the same technology, but keep it in more of a controlled way that's compliant, so financial companies can still benefit from the bots and the intelligence, understanding the intent of what's been said, reading the natural language and the syntax and context and whatnot, and responding with the right next best response, without giving your DSO or head of compliance sort of a heart attack wondering what's that model and what's that bot going to do. So we've developed custom language models specifically for credit collections and payments. So really this means we've built using transformers and open source models, a variety of models to work with credit collections and payments. So it just means that there's about 31 intents which are partially trained around a whole variety of things such as vulnerability around resilience, health vulnerabilities, financial vulnerability, happiness, frustration, signs of anger, intent around promise to pay, payment proposals, propensity not to pay, and so on. And it just means that you can sort of get these partially trained out of the box, and then you'd need about 10,000 lines of your own data pumped through it, the different models, to get it to a satisfactory sort of accuracy level to switch it on in the system. So yeah, that sort of satisfies both making the most of the technology, but also and getting a high level of automation from the bots in a way that's compliant. So yeah.
I mean, you raise a good point there around transparency, and I'll go back to people on the business side in terms of like how important is that transparency around decision making, being able to log it through, because that's definitely one of the complexities you have with some of these more complex models is understanding it, right? Which sounds like you've done some work on that. But what's your kind of view, Michael, in terms of like making sure it's transparent, the systems are transparent, and then so you're going to have quality checking almost like on these automated models to a certain extent.
It's all about authenticity as well.
Yeah.
You can put 16,000 data points or whatever it was, which is fantastic. I feel like I'm a bit of a dinosaur at times when I talk about this telephony piece. It's about making sure that the voice of your company, just like we're listening to telephone calls, we do call scoring, and we listen to pitch and tone on that, it's making sure that the quality of the responses that go out. Because really for me, I agree with your point, and probably the point that was raised this morning, an aid for an agent is where it can, if they're able to pick up on things, especially somebody who's newer to the industry and newer to the business, it can be part of the training program. Say this feels like this voice of dissatisfaction. This feels like an X. A transactional tool as well, so somebody who just does want to come in, clear their arrears in a one payment, and then move on. That should be there, but it will only give you the answer for the question that you're asking. It won't look behind sometimes to give you the opportunity to offer different services, different discussions.
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about, though, is just the capability to be able to do multilingual as an example. So I remember, like having to handle, collections negotiations in other languages other than English, right? And if you don't have the staff who actually speak it, that can be a challenge. Is that not an opportunity to be able to at least offer some initial service around that? Because it can do 24 different languages potentially as well.
Well, that goes right across the customer journey then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's the way you should be onboarding people as well, and making sure that there's no barriers to entry. So I think that's an authentic piece. If you're not set up in the way to deal with the customer at the beginning, in that sense, multilingual or whatever that may be, then you shouldn't be expecting to be able to pick it up at the back end.
Okay. And so we're getting into sort of, like, I suppose, things like different contact channels, those kind of things. I mean, Andy, we were chatting just in the preview around. One of the things that surprised me, I think it was in your survey, was other channels, and I think it was Viber. Was it Viber? No, Telegram. Telegram. That was it. Yeah. So that had come up as being like out of nowhere, as being at least from my point of view, as sort of like we talked about WhatsApp, we talked about SMS, but all of a sudden we got Telegram that seems to be getting more popular in the UK, which was quite surprising. I hadn't seen that before. It's like we're going to have these new channels. I mean, what channels do you think are coming up? I mean, Telegram is one, I suppose.
Yeah, no, Telegram. So on this, it's called SimilarWeb. They sort of list the most downloaded apps, for communication or the different areas per country. Telegram was the second most downloaded, but also it was number 8 on the usage. So I mean, I've got it downloaded. I don't use it as much, but I mean, basically, with as channels become popular, we integrate them. For example, we've got a client going live potentially in Japan, and they use Line out there. With each channel, there are nuances around how you can use it. So we've talked about for outbound collections, or let's say even someone, they sign up for a loan, immediately they can get a WhatsApp message just to get permission to sign up for open banking, for example. But there are nuances in how you can use them. So SMS, I feel, for two-way, it does maybe not get the attention it sort of deserves. A lot of people do one-way, but you can still build those good two-way designs on that channel. And again, if you send the first message from your sender ID brand name, just letting the person know, hi there, just to let you know, we'll be messaging you shortly about your account. Please save this number, i.e. giving them a tee-up message, a heads up. And then immediately after that, send them the main message, which is the hi, personalized name, you missed your last payment of X amount due on this date, and all the information you pull in from your system or file. That will mean you actually get a 3% higher response rate on the main message of the two-way SMS, and you're not going to get as many people thinking it's spam. But yeah, certainly WhatsApp Business, you can do mass outbound, and they did relax some of their terms around more about debt collections, not necessarily for brands further upstream, because there's been sort of nothing in their terms about that. So now it's more around using their channel. You're not allowed to use it fraudulently, which is kind of obvious for debt collection. So as long as you use it in the right way and you keep an eye on the status of your phone number, that's your WhatsApp ID, and make sure it doesn't go below a certain sort of level, then you're okay. And there's things you can do to actually get it back up from to a more positive status.
So should we do a straw poll? I think it's quite interesting about channels. So how many people in the room have access to SMS? Put your hands up. So it's everyone, right? How many people have access to WhatsApp or use WhatsApp? It's most people. Telegram. Let's talk about Telegram. A few people. What about Signal? Okay, Snapchat. This is dividing. Who uses Snapchat? So it's like, and TikTok. Don't use TikTok. Don't use TikTok. It's very addictive. So it's like there's these other, and I think that would depend probably on the demographics of the audience as well. So if I was to ask that amongst school-age children, I think you get a very different kind of response, and they're our future consumers. I mean, so like, how do we prepare for that? How do we prepare for that? I mean, Jonathan, maybe I have a think about that. It's interesting. It's like, and I got another question about SMS actually. I want to think about that. But how do we prepare for that? Because it feels like there's a generational change, and it's sort of starting to come through. But we've got to be ready for it. And when do we adopt it? And when do we adopt it right? So,
yeah, I think it's got to go back to quality, hasn't it? I think for us, the fruit of our work is in helping customers, essentially helping the customer to disclose what they're going through. And so the quality has to be, which is why we're mostly telephony. And I think, so when we think about other platforms like that we could prepare for a younger generation coming up, she's sad because I used to think I was in the younger generation coming up, but I'm not.
wait till you get to our age.
Yeah. If the quality isn't there, and if it isn't going to actually enable us to get to the meat of the conversation, which is like, what are you struggling with? Like, how can we help you? And if, like Vanessa said, 20 minutes of crying potentially, if the platforms aren't enabling us to have those really honest and open conversations to get to what support they need, then I think that initially means that we can rule out some of those platforms, because I don't think that Snapchat is necessarily going to help us to help the customer.
But there's also a question around timing, isn't there, as well? So when is the timing, and if it's just demographic, when is the timing of your cohort of the people who you are talking with Inflections? What channels do they have, and how far ahead do you need to plan? So if you don't want to have something that's going to be popular in 10 years' time and put that in now, when do you need to? But you have to be ready for when you need to be ready, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like having a crystal ball in that case, isn't it? Because we're trying to preemptively look at what platform is going to be the thing that really gets them the best outcome. But I don't think necessarily that spreading ourselves so thin to cover any which way that it could go, essentially. So
Michael, do you think we can just be reactive on it and just wait for it to come through, or do you think we have to be a little bit proactive, or adding extra channels, sort of maybe piecemeal?
I think we need to do the latter, and I think we need to be agile to be able to and start to be a bit forward-looking. This is the bit when I feel a bit old talking about the next bit, but perhaps that next generation, they don't like talking on the telephone. They might do a voice note, but they don't spend hours on the phone to the mates anymore. And they're the ones who's going to be moving to the art of telephone conversations. Could be something that I've sat here for 30 minutes saying how great it is.
Yeah.
But for the next generation, I'll be the dinosaur. And if we try and force the wrong type of communication on them, we've got to be embracing everything else for that next wave of consumers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, being flexible and agile, is that built into the systems? I mean, I'll go back to you, Andy, I suppose, in terms of like, I mean, getting that ready in terms of like, because you want to be able to implement these news channels relatively easily, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, you can go out there as a business, you know, and you can essentially work with a wholesale channel, digital channel connector, and you can get all the channels. You've got to sort of build and manage the integrations, and then, you know, figure out, okay, how am I going to start, you know, building my bots and that capability. Or you can work with, you know, sort of specialists, and just really what that enables is them to be able to, number one, provide you access to those channels. And again, like web chat is obviously another really common one that's used quite a lot by our clients. But then it's really being able to allow not just highly technical people to be able to build bots and your business logic into the bots, but also to enable non-technical people to do it. So making the user journey of the actual system user as easy to use as possible. So that's really when it's like drag and drop, building, you know, bot diagrams on a page, drop-down menus, no coding needed. And when you can do that, you can stand things up very quickly. Now, when I'm trying to, you know, do deals with people, the sort of operational and commercial people are like, you know, this is great, but my technical team are so snowed under, it's going to delay it by 6 months. So what we always do, I'd say probably about 80% of the time, we would just stand a standalone solution up very quickly. And again, you can have something live on the second or third call of a pilot where, you know, you can communicate with your customers two-way. You can even pull data in from a file if it's outbound, or if it's inbound, the bot can still qualify what the person wants. If it's around a payment, put people through to an agent if the payment threshold is below a certain amount to negotiate it up, or vice versa. So I would say, you know, being able to enable clients to do things very quickly and actually test cheaply is quite key, and something that's helped, you know, certainly us get quite a lot of traction.
Yeah, one specific question I wanted to ask you, which was, I think it was last week, Apple came out and said they were going to support RCS. How much of a big deal is that, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good one.
Does everyone know
We've talked about it a lot.
Does everyone know what RCS is, right? So it's the rich communications. It might be worth sort of explaining it, because it was only available on Android, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think the main issue is also adoption by the mobile networks, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when I ask the team about that, they're always like, look, the adoption's not quite high enough yet. So probably should have prepared a more comprehensive answer for that one, but that's what you're getting from me.
It's worth looking out for. So certainly on, so it allows you to do sort of rich communications over text, and it's certainly on LinkedIn, it got a lot of sort of wows, because they weren't expecting Apple to sort of capitulate on it versus iMessage, which seemed like that was kind of interesting. So it's like WhatsApp over text, essentially. So it's kind of interesting if that's going to be a game changer for us in the collections world, really. So
yeah, I actually saw, you may have seen, there's an article from WhatsApp. They're testing in-app payments, a bit like WeChat. They're testing it initially in Brazil, I think India as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that one develops.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about contact, I suppose, and getting in contact. I want to sort of move on and talk a little bit about engagement. So once you actually got people on the phone, or got them actually on the site, how should we think about data? And once you got a customer engaged, how do we think about data? I mean, is there a role for gathering extra data through the communication and the engagement? I mean, do we make enough of the engagement we do have, and would we capture the data enough to be able to use in things like segmentation and those kind of things? I mean, what's your kind of view? You're sort of nodding. I'm not sure if you're agreeing or disagreeing, Michael.
I think what happens is you got to be really careful as a business not to get data drunk. In other words, we can't get too much data that we end up not making a coherent decision.
Yeah.
So it's about capture, and also not knee-jerk capturing excessive amounts of data. You know, just because somebody says it in a meeting once doesn't mean that we have to go and capture it every time forever, amen. So it's making sure that the data that we're collecting is influencing the decision making. If it is about segmentation, again, making sure we don't make that segmentation so narrow that we box the customer or the borrower in, that they're unable then to explore other realms of communication or discussion.
I mean, how do we go about deciding what data is important versus not? I mean, because if you think about a collections call, really it's a data gathering exercise to a large extent, and you try and understand it. The challenge is that the data gathered on one call might be different from another call if it's a human, and you might have, missing pieces of information. So, if you make it consistent, it becomes a massive call, right? So how do we think about what's relevant, when we should gather it versus not? I mean, maybe Jonathan go first and then Michael come back.
Yeah, I suppose where we sit in this customer journey, we're kind of early collections, and to be honest, as a service, we don't actually get that much data from our clients. So we get obviously a name and a contact number and perhaps a debt balance or whatever. So we're not working with much data, but then the whole point of our conversation with the customer is to paint as big a picture of their circumstances as we possibly can without saying, and you need to make a payment. We're really trying to get those barriers down, to get the disclosure and to find out what they're going through, to then hopefully encourage them to then speak to their creditor and do a warm transfer in that instance where it's appropriate. So at that point, we're really trying to flesh out the wider picture of what they're going through for them. So at that point, it's like the return there is all that more information for the original creditor as to how they can then tailor the support that they can offer for that customer. So,
but having it very tailored around individual customers, does that mean that you're going to get inconsistent data across the board? So it's tailored for that customer, but it's not necessarily consistent for things like segmentation and those kind of things. I mean, do we have to think about it in terms of that data gathering to be able to do that? Because you can take the decision based off just that one point, but does it help you with segmentations going forward, as an example? How do you sort of like link everything together? Do you think, is there an opportunity there? I mean, I'm just throwing ideas out.
I suppose it's hard to say from where we sit in terms of what our service does, because essentially we're after those people that haven't engaged at all, actually, and it's trying to paint a bigger picture to really support that customer. So it is hard to say as to how consistent you could be then across your entire customer base in that situation.
Yeah.
I think ultimately we're just trying to make sure that people are accessing the...
Okay, I mean, Michael, I'll go back to you. So maybe I'll rephrase that question, which is like, how do you gather data that allows you, or you put it in the system, that allows you to personalize the conversation the next time, other than it being in the notes, I suppose, and reading through a long set of notes? I mean, are there other ways of thinking about what you would do, or what you should include, or what you should ask for to be able to do that? Yeah. Drive increased personalization.
Yeah, definitely. If let's take if the reason for arrears is unemployed, there's 100, 200 different variants for those individuals on what that means for them. Mm-hmm. Are they a single income household? Have they got dependencies? So it's picking out those so what moments, and what does that mean for them, and capturing them and attributing to the borrower. So the reason for arrears, for instance, is unemployed, single income household, 2 dependents, currently awaiting benefits. So that's the story thread. The conversation that sits around it is the value add, but that's the tailor-made piece. Somebody else who might be unemployed might have started a new job next Monday. So their story is completely different. It's picking out the key moments about so what, and then at what point did the conversation change direction? At which point did we maneuver down the road? And what was the sign that made us do it?
Yeah, so it's almost like, how do you boil down that conversation to what are the key factors you need to kind of know?
Yeah, and again, that should be, from my own utopia, that should be a pick list.
Yeah.
As soon as I open up Unemployed, we've captured that data in the past, and it's here, and I start to drag in the relevant points and add that persona around the borrower, because it should only be, or it could only be a temporary persona as well. And at some point, that whole persona and what we put in about an unemployed single income household could change. And then that whole persona changes for the future as well.
Yeah. And so you use the word persona there. I mean, have you come across, it's been talked about elsewhere, so things like behavioral science as an example. So you can put people in different, almost like personality kind of personas that might have different behaviors on how they might react to credit, as an example. So it might be someone who sticks their head in the sand versus not, or those kind of things. So what do you think of those kind of ideas? Because that's data driven for segmentation.
I'd love to get that at the point of lending, if I'm honest with you. I'd love to understand that type of persona. It's not just about collections, is it? No. Back to that know your customer piece. So if it was behavioural at the point of engagement with the borrower. But what do I think about? I've never really thought about it, is the honest answer. I'd love to know. Yeah. But you've got to remember is that when we're having a collections call or a collections communication with a borrower, it's very emotive. So the emotion that somebody has at collection stage is completely different to the emotion that they had at buying stage or taking out of the credit. Completely different to when they were up to date. It's emotive state. So behavioural is great, but it's that situation. How do you drill down to say, how will that person feel if they are threatened with X? So maybe it was an eviction or the turning off of a utility or whatever. How would you do that? That's really difficult to get to understand, isn't
And
it?
I think you have to get the science right, because you don't want to be having, making the wrong assumptions, right, as well, I would think. But it's, can it be used for segmentation as an example?
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan, what do you kind of think about that? And I suppose just talking about personalisation, we're trying to get towards personalisation. I mean, do you think we can ever get segments too small? I mean, you see where I'm going. I'm going down to let's get smaller and smaller segments. Let's get more data. Let's use that to try, sort of drive the conversation. But the counter to that is, well, actually, it's just going to be too small, and you just actually need to have a conversation. I mean, are we driving to try and get too much segmentation and getting too much personalisation?
I think you probably run the risk of just a massive number of pigeonholes that you're then trying to put the customer in. And in reality, I think it's more the conversational skills that we equip the agents with to be able to draw out all the relevant information that they need to support that customer and really, just to get to the heart of the issue. I think it's that approach really that will probably be more helpful than, say, having 1,000,001 personas that then we have to drill into the agents to then think, oh, they actually match Susan more than they match Bill, that sort of thing. It's actually getting to what skills do we need to equip the guys with to actually really support that individual customer, whatever their circumstances might be.
I suppose that leads into a question really around KPIs and metrics and how do you actually measure. So we talked about all these ideas, but how do you know whether it's a success or not? So how do you know whether human contact's a better success than digital success? How do you know if payment plans are a better success versus not? What's a good customer outcome or not? I mean, what are your thoughts, and Jonathan, what are your thoughts around KPIs and measures and those kind of things? Do we have what we need?
Well, I think in what we do, we've got loads of what we'd consider positive outcomes for customers, and what sort of support we've then either signposted the customer to, or have we managed to successfully get them through to the creditor to get them into the right support that they need. And in a way, that's what we're measuring. That's how we measure the success of the work that we do, is how well have we gotten to the heart of the issue for that customer. It's so difficult to pin down what is a positive outcome for that person, because the complexity of their life that they go through. I mean, I listened to a call earlier this week where there's this lady who's working night shifts part-time because her teenage daughter has really severe mental health issues, which means she can't be left during the day and she's not in school. So she's working at nights to then care for her daughter full-time during the day. And it's like her original creditor doesn't know about that situation. All they know at that point really is that she's in arrears, and we're trying to then support her and try and work out what is a good outcome for her. Is it going to be purely signposting her to debt advice? But in reality, there's so much more going on in her life that extra support that she needs to get that positive outcome. So the KPIs can, in a way, kind of lead us. We've got to approach it from what is a good outcome for them in that situation, as opposed to being too rigid in our approaches to what we think is a good outcome, essentially.
I mean, Andy, what about digital KPIs? I mean, sort of like we talked about outcomes there, but do you need a new set?
Yeah. So you've got your sort of standard KPIs that would be targeted on working with a client. So if it's inbound, typically they're looking to deflect those sort of more unnecessary calls to a web chat or a WhatsApp. So reduce abandoned call rates, reduce call rates. Maybe they're looking to adding the QR codes and stuff and links on their letters and communications to drive inbound, to sort of drive a particular payment metric. So those are quite common. For outbound, it's very much for collections, increasing response rates, typically by 2 to 5 times versus calling people, particularly when it's workers and so on who are, can't really pick up the phone at work. The main lead metric on a business case would be collections, if it's a collections use case. So on average, between 5 to 17% increase in collections versus the phone. So that's what would be like an A/B test. And then the second layer of a business case would be around either, it would be around agent resources or, staffing costs. So it'd be either driving an additional sort of 25% minimum capability in the contact center to help the business grow, or it would be reducing that, for a similar amount. So one client, for example, they're closing around 380 to 420 conversations a day using the bots with some digital channels alongside the AI versus 50 to 70 conversations a day on the phone. Now, their processes that they've deflected to digital one are quite narrow. So, there is still, it's about 23% of messages are being handed over to agents to manage, but they're still doing sort of 20 to 25 agents worth of work with 5 agents, on that one.
So, and I'll go back to Michael. Was like you guys sort of, it was like being opposite ends. Not why you're sitting, not why you're not sitting next to each other, but I mean, how do we measure the effectiveness of digital versus agents, as an example, and particularly in the world of sort of good customer outcomes and those kind of things? I understand the cost metrics, but there's also outcome metrics. I mean, you guys kind of set up for that. I mean, I know you're a big advocate of humans, but I mean, if you're getting the same from the digital, does it make sense? And how do you do that, particularly as you get demographic change as well? I mean,
there's one key metric that we haven't discussed, and that's voice of customer. And the voice of customer can be digital or be a satisfaction at the end of a call. Asking somebody, did they get what they needed from that today, and looking at those scores is a real key for us.
Yeah,
certainly as a business. So capturing that line of data, if our voice of customer if our human touch is not delivering the outcomes that the borrower needs, or the client needs at that point, then we've got to reassess the human touch. If we're being outperformed by the digital touch, then what are we doing differently there? So I think voice of customer is a real key metric that can get lost amongst the shuffle. Yeah. As a director of a business, my first thing is actually we can increase productivity if we bring more digital in with the same amount of people. But actually, it's are we delivering for our customer? You mentioned a really key point. Positive customer outcome might not be that they clear their arrears that day. Yeah. It might not be the payment plan. The positive customer outcome is that they've been listened to, they've been heard, and they're on the appropriate strategy. And actually, the positive customer outcome could be in 4 conversations time now because you've took it down the right route.
Yeah. So it's a good segue into the poll, right? So we actually put another poll, and it kind of linked into some of the questions that the survey that CSA had done at the start of the year around perceptions around the collections industry, particularly perceptions around the collections function. So I don't know if we can just quickly put the poll up. It should be on Slido. See if they can do that. So do we have an image issue? Which I think is really a big question around, do we have an image issue? So we're calling people, and we're calling people in collections as a collections function to voice the customer. How do we, do we have an issue in terms of like the way they're interacting with us? And it comes back to that psychology in terms of contact and engagement. So people want to vote on that. I think it probably should come through in terms of like how it comes through. Not sure if that's going to happen live or not. I mean, what do you kind of think? So, I mean, that's pretty convincing so far. So what do you kind of think? I mean, so like, I know we're working incredibly hard to really handle things, but what do you kind of think we need to do on that in terms of that engagement, and will it help engagement? And Michael, go first.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I think there's a collections industry have an image issue. I think it has an image issue in its own business at times. Yeah. The perception of the collections department is completely different in the collection of the sales department. And the people who work there, there's always a persona. Maybe collections is even the wrong word. It's an image issue. If I ring somebody up, or if I email somebody or WhatsApp them or Telegram them or whatever that may be, and my footer is collections agent at the end, it's a negative interaction. So absolutely there's an image issue. So I'm putting a barrier up just because of the word collections. I'm not here to listen, I'm here to collect. So it's changing that narrative, because there is a lot of great work that's been done around treating customers fairly, around making sure we understand why a customer is in that position.
How much would the change in the image issue change the amount of engagement we would have? Do you think it would? So if we change the image issue, it feels like it would probably change the amount of engagement we have in terms of people raising issues, getting in contact with us. I mean,
yeah.
Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, fair. So I'm not advocating that we start coming out with all these new job titles, like
hugs, kittens, and
bunnies. Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, there's a reason for that contact.
Yeah.
But I think it could bring in engagement if the perception's different, and maybe integrating the collections process as part of the onboarding and signposting customers very early on when they onboard with a business about, we're here to help, we're here to listen. One of the things we talked about previously was preemptive. Actually speaking to a customer before they're in arrears. Actually speaking to a customer as part of that journey to signpost that we're available and talking. And collections culturally is part of the business and part of the voice. It's not, we treat you really well until you go over there to collections. I think that is about integrating collections within your culture in the business, and then that should increase engagement, because that becomes authentic communication.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan, what's your kind of view, and like, how do we sort of change that perception? And maybe you're in a slightly different spot, just given sort of where you work in your business, but like, how do we change the perception generally within the industry? And, you know, how can we make a difference? Because I know we're doing a lot of great things, right?
Yeah, it is frustrating, because I mean, I started my career in debt advice, and there's always that fear. Like, clients in debt advice always have that fear of speaking with their creditors. And then when they have been encouraged to engage, like what we do through Reach Out, the sense of relief is so palpable, because they've had a pleasant interaction with that person. I mean, it can depend on sector, and some sectors are leading ahead more than others, I would say. I mean, that's pretty clear. But, you know, there's a lot of creditors out there getting thank you cards. You know, thank you, I spoke to this agent, I actually had a really great interaction, and they helped me resolve this debt, and that's brilliant. And so there is, the frustration is fair. I think the solution would be it's communicating it up front. Like, if you're switching to a new energy provider, it's like, how well are we nailing down at the beginning of that very customer journey? You know, we're here to help you, rain or shine. You know, whatever happens over your time with us, we want you to feel like you can give us a call. You know, we don't want you to feel like this is, if you have a problem, it's, you know, it's whatever messaging you want to nail down there, but it's making sure that the customer knows at any point of the customer journey that they can be open and honest with their supplier. And that's hard. I mean, that's me just saying that is very easy, but as a massive message to communicate. But the support is there, and that's what's frustrating.
I love this idea of like, how do you sort of embed it within the onboarding process within the business as well? Because that's a business thing as much as anything we can kind of control. I mean, Amanda, what's your view on things like, particularly things like preemptive conversations, and like doing that in a kind of a non-threatening kind of way?
Yeah, sure. Just on the industry thing you mentioned, just in terms of, you know, communicating digitally, and, you know, it's really about how customers are spoken to on these channels, and again, that reassurance and giving them that comfort blanket, and then also what sort of suggestions are you, and, you know, indicators you're giving to the agents who are messaging with them in the messaging system. You know, such as an example, if someone messages back and they've been getting chased about a payment or something, and they say, oh, you know, sorry I'm late, you know, I had some tests done, but, you know, I can make payment. An agent might see that just as a payment opportunity, right? Let's get it done and move on. But actually, a second layer of conversational AI you can use is propensity scoring on the messages in real time that come in. And you can actually have it tagged as, in that case, it might be a health vulnerability at a certain percentage, 63%. So that is an indicator to an agent, actually, based on this tag, that this person might have a health vulnerability. Actually should investigate it further, or the business might say, well, we should actually treat this person in a different way. Yes, get the payment, but actually let's investigate this further, and, you know, give them that sort of support, even if they might, you know, be happy to move on and make payment if they've had some tests done. That ambiguity can actually be picked up by a model. So I think that's a really cool way to sort of, you know, in maybe a bit of a micro way, raise the sort of reputation of the collections industry when we're communicating digitally.
Michael, did you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I think there was one point, I think you touched on it yourself. Consistency. Consistency across the industry. If you are making the collections interaction with a borrower or a customer, they are probably having you will not be the only payment that they're missing. For some people, they could be having 5 interactions, 6 interactions over the course of a week, over the course of a day, potentially. So it's making sure that as an industry, we share best practices. As an industry, we all sign up to doing it the correct way. embracing technology for some because they're able to embrace it into the business is great. But the code of, almost like the code of conduct, I'm following it to make sure if we give a negative interaction as call number 1 that day, they will not answer the next 5. So we're all there to look after the borrower. We've all got different nuances. We've all got different reasons. But at the end of the day, the borrower, the reason for arrears or the reason for being there is the same 5 times. So I think consistency is one of the big things that we need to make sure we have.
Yeah, that's kind of come through earlier as well. I think it's kind of interesting. Okay, well, we're almost out of time. So there's another question that we're going to ask, which we'll put on after this, which is just around what do people here think we should do about it. It kind of links into some of the stuff around the CSA has been doing. I know a few people are having conversations, so I think it's kind of an interesting kind of space in terms of what we need to do about that. So just to finish off this piece here, I mean, what are so communications and customer engagement, and what are the things we've got to watch out for the future? I mean, just like in quick 2 bullets. I mean, let's go this way, Michael. Maybe just start. I mean, do you want to start first?
Well, learn from the Black Swan events we just had in the last 3 years. You know, make sure we're doing a bit of rear view looking as well about how we've reacted to certain events, because there may be more Black Swan events to come. And how do we we can't tell the future, but we've certainly got to make sure that we continue to have that toolkit for people to be able to do it.
Yeah. Jonathan?
I think deficit budgets is just a massive issue. And I think it's how, on what services do we put that burden of being able to help fix that problem for people? Because income max isn't necessarily going to solve that problem for everybody. And I think there's got to be a real, I know it sounds a bit cliche, but like a really collaborative spirit of working with multiple organisations to actually get the exact help that people need, because there's no quick fix to the deficit of 250 quid a month, you know, in one phone call. It's got to be working with multiple partners to support people, I'd say.
Okay. Andy?
So lean towards conversational AI, build up your library of AI intents, and just, you know, enable the bots to sort of manage more of the conversation where it's going to benefit your quality of service, but also the customer. And, you know, ultimately the reason why sometimes we are kind of, you know, Amazon now, typically you've got to go through the bot first. The reason why they do this is we know, you know, maybe a 10-15 minute phone call one-to-one costs the business maybe, I don't know, £1.50, whereas a digital conversation is like 20 to 30p. So if you can get that blend right with the phone, with the digital and the conversational AI, you know, you'll be in a good place.
Yeah, seems like that, the nuance is like the critical piece, right? How do you sort of blend it? Because it's both seem appropriate. So, well, thank you very much to the panel. Maybe just give them a quick hand. Really appreciate it. So.